Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encourage Mindset. I'm your host, Ethan Vandehei. Today, I have a special guest with me, Josh Roybal. He is going to be introducing maybe some familiar mindset topics, but also maybe something that you've never heard before. Maybe you need more insight on. So this will be a fun podcast today. Excited to have Josh on, but I'm going to let Josh introduce himself to the audience. Josh, why don't you share everyone your story?
Yes, well, thank you, Ethan. Awesome to be on your show. Thanks for inviting me. And I really respect your longevity. I could see that you've had quite a few shows over the years and you just keep going. And that's something I really respect. In these modern times, people are often try something and quit. And, it's rare to see just keep going, and I think that's so important. So congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. So why don't you tell the audience, maybe if you're comfortable with where you're from right now, because we're totally in a different time zone, maybe what you're doing right now, if that's up for you. But I want to know. So if you want to share, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's a really interesting story. So about 7 years ago, I met my wife in Ibiza. I was a manager for DJs, and I was there setting up shows for my DJs. And one of my DJs actually overdosed. He had a prescription for Adderall, and he was at the club, and he took, I think, maybe like 12 pills of ecstasy, and he just completely started talking to himself, jabbering and taking his clothes off and running around the streets, and he just disappeared. And then a little bit later, a few hours later, the Spanish Civil Guard showed up. It's kind of like the police in Ibiza, and they kicked us out. And so I had nowhere to stay. And luckily, I had met this French girl at a villa party, and she felt sorry for me. So she said, "Come stay with me in London. I have a place there, so you don't overstay your visa in Ibiza." So I went and stayed with her, and we got together and we decided to travel. We both love travel. We wanted to see the world. And so we started traveling all through Europe, brought her to the US, went through all of Asia. And when we got to Vietnam, COVID happened and they closed the borders completely. And so we couldn't leave for 2 years. We were basically trapped in Vietnam and nobody could come in, nobody could come out. And so we're like, okay, well, I guess this is our home for a little while, until all this mess gets cleared up. And so we lived there for 2 years. And at the end of those 2 years, Vietnam didn't, they had been keeping these foreigners inside their borders for 2 years, and they wanted everybody out. They were like, get the hell out, the borders are open now. We want you gone. And so the problem is that we just had a baby. And so at the end of those 2 years, it coincided with the birth of our son. And it's a bit complicated to get birth certificates in foreign countries, deal with embassies to get these passports and all these things. But Vietnam is very much like a bureaucracy, and it's hard for anyone to make a decision. Everything is just a red stamp and that's it. Either it has a red stamp or it doesn't. And there's nobody to talk to or to explain your misfortune or explain you have a baby or anything. They didn't care. They just said, no, go. And we couldn't go because we're not going to leave our baby there. And so we overstayed. By the time we finally get everything, got his paperwork and decided, okay, now we can leave, we had to pay almost $4,000 for what they call an exit visa. And so, we couldn't just leave. We had to pay to leave. And so we pay the $4,000. We have this baby. And, the flight to the US is really hard. I did that a year before, and it was like a 40-hour flight. I had to land in LA and stay there for a while and then come to New York. And so I was like, there's no way a newborn is going to be able to do all this traveling. And so we decided, well, we've never been to Cambodia. It's right next door. Let's just pop over there. And so that's where we are now. And we've been here for about 7, 8 months. Now I'm in a town called Siem Reap, which is very beautiful. One of the wonders of the world is here, but it is hot. But yeah, that's how I ended up here.
That's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing. And it sounds like a little bit of your story is going to kind of relate to my first question. That's patience, right? I think that's just the biggest thing these days is everything requires some patience. maybe a little bit more hard work trying to figure out the problem, right? Sounded like you had some potential problems that could have arose, especially with the flight with the baby, right, that you brought up. So the biggest thing these days is patience, right? We're impatient with our, somebody else, for example, in a relationship or a coworker, or, impatient with results or something else. So what can we do, Josh, in your mindset realm to better understand patience and maybe, develop a habit for that more?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's funny because being a parent taught me that, because I historically don't and aren't a person who have a lot of patience. I always want things now, and like most people. And so having a baby really helped me to get patience, and I understand that things take time. I had some success in business a few years ago, and it all happened really sudden and like a whirlwind. And so I really had in my mind, okay, that's how things can happen. But because of COVID and different things, that business wasn't able to survive. And now, as I'm building new businesses, I'm like, wow, it's not like that first time. Now it really takes patience. It really takes, I kind of got luck on my side that first time. And now it's like grasping for that luck, trying to find what works, going through everything, seeing all the failures. And so I've learned that patience is super important in that regard, and the ability to do something without any reward, I think, is a part of patience that is not a natural thing. It's something we have to work at. Especially for myself. Like, I get bored easy, and I don't want to just keep doing the same thing, repetitive. And so, if we can, it's like a superpower, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of where I think of the word endurance, right? You said, don't get bored of doing the same thing over and over and over again. It requires a lot of endurance because you're trying to, and I say like, you got to try to persevere on keep doing what is right every time. Even though you want to take shortcuts in life or shortcuts in anything, sometimes you have to have the endurance to not do that. So, what has been, one of the core mindset topics that you really feel like you've mastered or potentially have felt like you've learned a lot from and that you could share with the audience today?
Well, there is one mindset that I haven't heard a lot, because a lot of times we do hear similar mindsets, uh, ideas, and think concepts and things like that. But I had one that was kind of forced upon me in my life, and it really stayed with me. When I was 16, I was hit by a car. I was a pedestrian walking back to school from lunch, and a Camaro going 55 miles an hour struck me. Another kid was running across the crosswalk, and so she swerved to miss him. And I was there right on the edge of the sidewalk, and just slammed into me. And I flew up and hit the stop lights. It broke the intersection lights. They found my shoe like a mile away. And I guess, I don't remember any of this, but I kept trying to stand up, and I would just fall back down. And so the bystanders eventually held me down so I wouldn't keep trying to stand up until the ambulance arrived, and all of this. And during that time when I was in the hospital, I have this vivid memory. There was a time when I was under the drugs and everything, and I wake up, and I see all my family, my uncles and my aunts, everybody's in the room, and they're all crying. And what a weird way to wake up to a room full of crying people. I was, but I was groggy and under the influence of, who knows what they were giving me. And later I found out that I had flatline. And so when I came back from the flatline, that's when my eyes opened, and that's why everybody was crying, because everybody was ready for me to be dead, basically. And so that whole situation really completely changed my life, and it changed my mindset, because the way I took it was that I should have died. I should have died there. Most people wouldn't have survived an accident with that much impact. My back went through the windshield. Really, I had so many broken ribs, and my lung was punctured, and I was really messed up, and I survived. And so the mindset that I took from that is I said, well, this is like a bonus. I had my little life, and I should have died, And so everything from that point forward is like a video game, like the bonus round, like, and you're excited when collect the thing and you get the bonus play. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to live my life like it's the bonus round, which means I can take bigger risks, which means I can do things that otherwise maybe I would be afraid to, because I'm like, well, what could happen, But when you're living your life like it's a bonus round, you have less fear. But that bonus round mind mentality has kind of changed with having my son now, because my risk tolerance has gone down tremendously, because now I'm just worried about him, trying to make sure he's okay, and not touching, a dangerous insect or stuff like that. But yeah, that's just something that I wanted to share about that kind of mindset. It's really been liberating, looking at life as a bonus.
Well, first off, it's awesome that you're still here, and it's special that you have the capability to share a powerful story like that, because not a lot of people get, you know, a powerful story to kind of, potentially change the way that, they're running their life before. Not that, you're running your life in a bad way or anything, but this gave you a whole different perspective, and it sounded like it did. And that's kind of what this bonus life is it's a whole new perspective for you now. So everything is seeming to be in a whole different way, because now you really get to appreciate everything, which, Josh, I hope I'm sounding correct when I say that. Everything, especially now your new son, you get to really appreciate it. So that's super cool. And obviously exciting that you have a little one. So what has been, your favorite moments so far as a dad? Do you have one that stands out so far?
Oh wow! So it's almost like each day there's some new favorite moment. Because now he's finally reached the point where he's starting to put together a few words together. It's been a few months where he can say "mama," "dada," or "more," or something, but now he can be like "want more" or "come with me." He can. So just seeing that mind develop and these skills develop has been really special for me, and fun for me. But I actually have a crazy story regarding him too, which happened recently. We were in Thailand, and there was this bug in the bushes, this little like bee, or I didn't know what it was. It had these orange and black stripes on it, and it was pretty big. And I was just appreciating nature, and showing him like, oh, look at the little creature there, and he very quickly goes to grab it, and so it stung him, and so it stings his finger, and I just quickly grab the thing and throw it. And he's just screaming in horrible, horrible pain. And, and we're out for a walk. We're not near our condo or anything like that. And so my wife starts panicking, and we're like, what do we do? He got stung by this thing. And so I quickly look up on the internet in Google Images of insects in Thailand that are dangerous. And the very first picture is this thing that stung him. And it turns out it's an Asian wasp. And so I'm like, okay, well, what do we do? How dangerous is it? And so I start Googling, and I go to this blog, and the first thing I read is that it's fatal for elderly and children. And when I read that, my heart just dropped. And my wife is holding him, and I show her, and we're like, no, like in that 1 second, I think, okay, babe, my baby's gonna die right now, because I was showing him some nature, and so it was horrible. And so we start running around, and we were somewhere on foot, and so there were no cars to give us a ride to the hospital, absolutely nothing. And so we finally run, and we get a Grab. Here they have a thing called Grab. It's kind of similar to Uber. And so we find one on the way to the hospital, and I start using Chat GPT to try to learn about this wasp and just try to make sense of it. And it turns out that it's not fatal. And so I had a bad piece of information. This was just a blogger whose results came up. They had probably heard that from somebody. And so it's totally wrong information. If you get attacked by a lot of these Asian wasps, yeah, you can die, but one isn't going to kill you. And so it really calmed me down. But it taught me a valuable lesson in seeking information, like, and in an emergency, you tend to just go for the first piece of information. You're not really diligently researching or anything like that. But that was a big lesson. and it's a scary moment. But he's completely fine. It was just a bee sting. So
Okay, that's good. But no, it's also so true. I think in many instances, besides like a injury or something like that, we always want the quick answer, like we talked about earlier in this podcast. Like no one really has the patience anymore to do the research, and especially in crucial emergency situations, like you said, you're going off the first thing you see and you believe it's true. I also want to talk about today on this podcast self-control, right? I think a lot of people, they develop mindset, discipline, they're doing their habits, their goals for a good couple of days, maybe a week, and they just can't have this self-control to continue to maintain focus, maintain positive energy and spirit, and they kind of let just things, go, and they just don't care anymore. And then they give up. And that's what kind of leads to a lot of self-doubt and negative talk. So how can we have more self-control and discipline, Josh, to make sure we're living our lives to the fullest, and maybe to the, not the fullest, but at least what we want to do?
Well, one way that I've found to have more self-control is I've been learning, because my wife is very much interested in this. I've been learning and studying a little bit about meditation and things like that. And I was doing this practice where you feel the uncomfortableness and you zone in on it. And so last time I was in Colorado, I was in a very cold place. I was sitting on a park bench. It was very cold, and I was shivering, and I was, not good. And I stopped, and I thought, well, just examine this. What is this sensation of cold? And so I stopped shivering, and I located in my body where these cold feelings were. My hands felt a little bit cold, and I just felt that as a feeling without judgment, without saying this is bad, this is cold. I was just saying this is just a sensation that I'm experiencing right now. And really quickly, this feeling left me. This feeling of agitation, of uncomfortableness, it just left me, and I just sat there peacefully in the cold, just observing the cold. And so I think that's one tool, is if we're able to kind of zoom in on what's causing that discomfort, and just observe it and just be like, well, okay, well, it's not that bad. And so if you're doing something on the computer that's repetitive, or you're doing outreach to try to get customers and you're getting tired of it, I think if you stop and think, well, why am I tired of this? And maybe it's your back is hurting from sitting in that same position too long, and you just need to stand up and work a bit. Or maybe it's that you're not that is boring because you're just reaching out and spamming people. Maybe you should start to actually research the person a little bit, learn about them, see some commonality, and that'll help get rid of this boredom feeling, and it helps to encourage a little bit more patience, I think. So just zoom in on what's causing the annoyance, I guess.
Oh, I love that answer. I think that's a lot of, sometimes the issues with ChatGPT, like it's great sometimes, but it's not going to help you learn much about a person. It's going to help you send this generic bland email. And, that's the pros and cons to it with anything in life that you do. But most importantly, it's the effort you put into these things. The results definitely will show the effort, at least my opinion. What you get in is what you'll get out. And especially you see that in professional development, you see that in professional sports. When they put in hours of work, they'll most likely succeed. So thank you for sharing your knowledge today on the podcast. Is there anything that you want to share with your time with me today for the audience that you feel like we didn't cover it all, Josh? Or maybe there's like a quote that you love to share, that you live by, that you think others should listen to or know. So whatever else you got, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, there is another mindset that I don't hear a lot of. I hardly ever hear it. And I first discovered it in a book by Steven Pinker. It's a book called Enlightenment Now. And it's related to physics. And so it's the idea of entropy. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Absolutely not. So I would love to kind of hear it.
Well, it's really interesting. So there's this law in physics, and it's called the law of I think it's called the third law of thermodynamics.
Okay.
And what it says is that everything in a closed system, so like our Earth or anything that's closed, always gravitates towards disorganization. And
Oh,
so the idea, and we see it everywhere. It's true. And so a lot of people will use an example, over a week you clean your desk, and a week later what happens? Your desk is a mess, but your desk will never reorganize itself, you know.
for
And
sure.
so it's that way with everything. Another great example is a sandcastle. You build a sandcastle, the wind comes, scatters it, but the wind will never form a sandcastle. you know
Mm,
Everything in the universe, everything is always going towards disorganization. And so in this book he brings up the idea that that's kind of one of our main reasons for being a human, is organizing things. We build these cities, these towns, we everything is just basically this construction job of humans organizing all this entropy that's going to disorder. And you'll see over time, even our towns, over centuries, they'll become dust or ruins, and so everything is always heading towards that. And so I see that as humankind's big enemy, is entropy. And so it's not somebody from another religion, or it's not somebody who's my enemy because they believe in this politician and I like my politician. All these stupid things that people think are good reasons to fight, or think it's a good enemy or a good foe. Well, that person is nothing compared to entropy. Entropy is going to literally rip you apart when you die. It's going to rip apart our universe over a long enough timeline. Everything. And so you need to fight. If you have a limited time on this earth, you need to fight entropy as good as you can and help others fight it. And that's your main job. Why waste time fighting for these other things that are really trivial when you think about physics and what this law implicates?
for sure. No, it's just a side question on that. So what is one thing you do to fight it? What is one thing, or maybe two things, but what do you do?
Well, I fight it constantly, every day. And what one example that I like to explains it well is, even a knife blade, like let's say if you're a chef and you keep your knife sharp and so it cuts well. If you leave that blade on the table for a week and look at it at a microscope, there's entropy on that blade. And so if you sharpen your blade, you look at it on the microscope, it's a perfect sharp edge, and you don't have to cut anything, you don't have to do anything, and it will get duller on its own. And so I think that's a good metaphor. But for myself, to answer your question, even something like taking care of yourself, taking care of your feet, for example. Like let's say you go on a long walk or you're hiking or something. What happens? Your feet, you get calluses, your feet get worn down. And so
Mhm.
you need to take care of that. You need to file your feet, you need to put lotion, and that's fighting entropy. When you're doing anything basically to reorganize even your own cells, you're fighting entropy.
Yep. Yep. Totally. No, I love it. I think this is a new concept that I've never heard of. So I love that you could share that with me. Definitely, I will have to check out the book. I'm just assuming you can get it off Amazon. So I'll have to check that out and give that a read and then reconnect with you about it. But thank you so much for enlightening me on a new concept. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to share today, Josh? You've been, a huge, wise, instrumental asset to the podcast today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. No, I think we covered some good aspects, and I'm happy to be able to share. These are things I've never really talked to anybody about in any kind of public forum. So it's fun talking to you, and I'd love to chat with you again sometime
Yeah,
after you read
absolutely.
the book or something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So sounds good. Thank you very much for coming on and have a great rest of your night.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. See you later.
So if you're ready to grow, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and let's build a mindset that empowers and transforms.